Okay, so get this. Imagine looking into someone's eyes and you see not one, but two pupils staring back at you.
Whoa,
Right. It's like something straight out of fantasy or sci-fi, right?
totally.
But that's actually the reality for people who have this rare condition. It's called polychoria.
Yeah, polychoria, it's a fascinating anomaly. And today we're going deep, deep into the science
Your
behind it.
feet deep down the rabbit hole on this one.
Exactly. Like, what do we actually know? What are we still figuring out about this whole extra pupil thing?
Yeah, and that's what makes this deep dive so interesting, right? Because we're not just talking about like an extra dot in someone's eye. We're
Hmm.
talking about all these questions about like how our eyes develop in the first place, how we actually see, and then like what happens when, something goes off script.
Yeah, and you know what's really interesting is it just seems to kind of pop up like it's not linked to, a certain part of the world or a certain age group. It can happen to anyone.
Yeah.
So it's not like, oh, if you live in this country, you're more likely to have it, or if you're this age, it's a
That's
mystery.
totally.
It really is. So like that just makes you wonder what's the root cause? Like why is this happening?
Right. It's the million-dollar question. We don't know for sure, like, the exact cause of polychoria still kind of has that mystery around it, but researchers, they're like detectives, they've uncovered some clues, and they're doing that by looking at other conditions that seem to kind of pop up alongside polychoria.
Oh, okay. So like medical detective work.
Exactly.
Okay, so like give us an example. What kind of clues are we talking about? So for instance, they've noticed that polychoria is sometimes present in people who also have cataracts.
Okay.
Now, it's not that the cataracts themselves are causing polychoria, but they think that maybe, just maybe, there's a connection there. Something about how both of those conditions, they kind of affect, the eye's development, especially early on, when the eye's just forming.
So it's like finding these puzzle pieces that could maybe potentially fit together, but we don't have the whole picture yet.
Exactly. It's a puzzle, and that's why it's so challenging, but that's also what makes it really, really interesting to study.
Totally, totally. So let's talk about what it's actually like to have this condition, right? I mean, we keep saying like extra pupil, but like paint us a picture. What does that look like? And then more importantly, how does it affect, how someone sees?
Okay, so picture this, all right? You got the iris, right? That's the colorful part of your eye.
Right.
Think of it like the aperture on a camera lens.
Okay.
It controls how much light actually gets in by adjusting the size of your pupil.
So the iris is like it's like opening and closing to let in different amounts of light.
Exactly. Exactly. But now, with polychoria, imagine instead of one iris muscle controlling a single pupil, you've got multiple iris muscles and multiple pupils all in one eye.
So you would think, just like intuitively, you'd think more pupils, that means more light's getting in it.
Yeah.
That has to mean better vision, right?
Yeah.
Like you're taking in more?
You would think so, right? But it doesn't work that way.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it actually, having those extra pupils and by extension, extra iris muscles, it usually messes with vision. It doesn't actually make it better.
Oh, wow. Okay, so how does that work?
Yeah. So, for one thing, the pupils in polychoria, they're often smaller than a typical pupil. So that means less light is actually getting in.
Like, so counterintuitive.
It is. And because those pupils aren't working together, like in sync, it makes focusing really difficult. It's like, imagine trying to see clearly through a camera lens, but it's misaligned.
Like you can't get a clear picture.
Exactly. It's blurry, it's distorted, and to make things even weirder, the shape of the pupils can be different. So some people with polychoria have multiple pupils that are round,
Okay.
but others might have one that's actually oblong shaped.
An oblong pupil. See, that's wild. That just adds like a whole other layer of complexity to it. You know what I mean? It makes you realize how much we still don't know about the eye. And that's just the beginning, right? When it comes to the actual like vision challenges that come with polychoria.
Yeah. That's really just scratching the surface.
So it's not even just about like, oh, you've got these extra pupils. It's
Yeah.
how does that then translate to your ability to like see and process the world around you?
Exactly.
What are some of the like specific vision problems that people experience?
So one of the big ones is blurred vision. Like things just aren't in focus. And that can range from, kind of mild to pretty severe depending on the person.
Wow. And I'm assuming that can make, everyday life pretty challenging.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then on top of the blurriness, a lot of folks with polychoria, they just have worse vision overall. It's harder to see clearly, both up close and far away.
And not to mention, you were saying earlier that the pupils, they're often smaller, so they're letting in less light. I would imagine dealing with glare from bright lights is probably a nightmare. Oh, yeah. Sensitivity to glare is a huge problem. It's like their eyes are constantly being bombarded with too much light, even when, for you and I, it wouldn't be a big deal.
Exactly.
And that's something that they deal with all the time.
Wow. And all of this is to say that, even within polychoria, it's not like one diagnosis fits all, right?
Right.
There are actually different types of this condition.
There are. So we break it down into true polychoria and pseudopolychoria.
Those are some words right there.
Yeah, I know, right?
So break those down for us. What is the difference between like a true versus a pseudo? All right, so let's start with the rarest of the rare, true polychoria. So in this type, each of those pupils, it's not just a hole in the iris, it actually has its own set of muscles, and they react to light just like your regular pupil would.
So they constrict, they dilate, each on their own.
Independently.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's like having multiple fully functional pupils all in one eye.
That's incredible. I can only imagine, though, again, the vision challenges that come with that.
It's a lot to deal with, for sure. And then on the other side, we have pseudopolychoria, which is still really rare, but it's a little more common than true polychoria.
Okay, and what defines that one?
So in pseudopolychoria, the extra pupils, they're kind of tricking you. They look like pupils, but they don't actually work like them.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's basically a defect or a hole in the iris, but it doesn't have that, that independent movement.
So they don't react to light.
Exactly. And the interesting thing is, pseudopolychoria, it's often linked to other genetic conditions.
Like what? What kind of conditions?
So one example is Sickle syndrome. It's a rare disorder that affects growth. And then there's also Axenfeld-Rieger syndrome, which that one impacts eye development specifically.
Okay.
And so both of those conditions, they can cause a bunch of different eye abnormalities, and pseudopolychoria is just one of them.
So in that case, it's like a piece of a bigger puzzle. It's like this clue that points to something even more complex going on genetically.
You got it.
Wow. This is also fascinating. But with a condition that already seems, so delicate, having to do with the eye, I have to ask, are there even treatment options for something like this?
That's a great question, and one that we're going to dive into right after the break. So stick with us.
All right. So before the break, we were like on the edge of our seats here.
Yeah.
Thinking about like treatment for something like polychoria.
Right.
It just seems so delicate.
It is. I mean, we're talking about the eye here. It's not something you want to, mess around with.
Exactly. So, like, are we talking surgery? What's the deal?
So you would think that with a condition as rare as polychoria that we would have like a clear-cut treatment plan, right?
Right.
But it's not quite that straightforward. The good news is not everyone with polychoria needs surgery. If their vision isn't like super impacted, they might just monitor it over time, just kind of see how things go.
Okay, so like a wait and see approach.
Exactly. Just got to make sure, things aren't changing too quickly. So regular checkups with an eye doctor, that's key.
Gotcha. But for the cases where, like, more intensive treatment is needed, what are we talking about then?
Okay, so this is where it gets really wild. There is this procedure. It's called a pupilloplasty.
Pupilloplasty. Right.
And basically the surgeon, they reshape the iris and they try to create, a single working pupil.
So they're, like, essentially removing the extra pupil.
Essentially, yeah. It's pretty amazing.
It is amazing. How
Yeah.
how often do they do that? Like, is that a common thing?
It's not common at all. And you would think, again, with as rare as polychoria is, there'd be, more of a set procedure.
Right.
But believe it or not, that pupilloplasty thing, it's based on just one documented case that we know of.
Wow. So it's like literally one of a kind at this point.
One of a kind.
Wow. It really goes to show, like, how much we're still figuring out.
Absolutely. It's uncharted territory, which is exciting. There's so much potential there. But also, it kind of makes you realize we need way more research in this area.
For sure.
Yeah, and it's not just pupilloplasty. They're actually experimenting with other techniques.
Yeah.
So there's this one method where they use this special type of suture to help with lens implants, and they've used it in people with polychoria who also need cataract surgery.
It's just crazy to me how something that seems like on the surface level, just like an extra pupil, could have so many layers when it comes to treatment.
It's wild, isn't it?
Really does. It really shows, how incredible the eye is and how much we still don't understand about it.
It does. And the fact that it's so rare, it makes it even harder to study. I mean, if you don't have enough cases to look at, it's tough to do those large-scale studies, the ones
Hmm.
that really give you, like, solid answers.
Absolutely, absolutely. So for someone listening who, maybe they're thinking, wait, do I have polychoria? What would you tell them? What's like the prognosis, like long term? What can someone expect?
Okay, so first of all, don't go self-diagnosing, all right?
Right.
If you see something weird with your vision or with your eyes, talk to a professional. That's always the best first step.
For sure. This whole deep dive, it really makes you think. Like we started talking about extra pupils, which already sounds, kind of wild.
Right.
But the more we got into it, it's like, whoa, there's so much more to it than you'd expect.
It really goes to show there's so much about the human body that we don't have figured out yet.
Totally. And it's like, that saying, like the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know.
100%. And that's what makes this whole thing so fascinating, right? I mean, polychoria, it's so rare.
Right.
Every case is like super valuable to researchers because it's like this little clue that could help us understand the bigger picture.
For sure. For sure. So for anyone out there listening and maybe, they're thinking to themselves, wait a minute, do I have polychoria?
All right.
What would you tell them?
Okay, so first things first, don't go on WebMD and self-diagnose, all right?
Right, right.
If you notice anything off with your eyes, with your vision, anything weird, go see a doctor, an eye doctor, a professional. They can actually, look at your eyes and figure out if there's actually something going on.
Absolutely. And it just goes back to, like, those regular checkups, they're so important. Whether you think you have a rare condition or not, it's always good to just, get those eyes checked out.
Totally. Think of it like, you wouldn't wait for your car to totally break down before you take it to the mechanic, right?
That's such a good analogy. I love that.
Got to keep things running smoothly. And the same goes for your eyes. Those regular checkups, they can really help catch things early on, keep your vision in tip-top shape.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said. This deep dive has really, it's just been incredible. It's amazing to think that something as seemingly simple as, like, an extra pupil can be so much more than meets the eye. Literally, right. But really, it just shows you the power of scientific curiosity and, like, digging deeper.
For sure.
There's always more to learn.
Always. And who knows, maybe someone listening right now, they'll be the one to, crack the code on polychoria.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
That would be awesome.
Well, on that note, I think that wraps up another episode of The Deep Dive.
Another one in the books.
If you've enjoyed this journey into the honestly bizarre world of polychoria, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of our future deep dives.
We're going deep on all sorts of topics, so.
All sorts of stuff. And until next time, keep those eyes peeled and, never stop questioning the world around you.
Stay curious out there.